this kind of aggression, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of those we consider our adversary. That's what I work. That's what I do in my work. I'm never going to put myself in the shoes of the imperialists because guess what? I live in an imperialist country. I live in the country that is responsible for the vast majority of suffering in this planet. I live in an empire. We have to understand the society that we live in if we're going to understand Russia. And from Russia's perspective, how much can one take? That's the point here. How much can Russia take? How much can it tolerate in terms of this aggression, this saber rattling, this threat of war? Russia and China recently came out with a document spelling out direct opposition to NATO and saying that a multipolar world requires a de escalation and demilitarization of the planet, and that Russia and China are willing to do that themselves, but only if that is undertaken at a world scale. That means the United States has to be on board with that. And we know the United States will never do that so long as it is an imperialist system, so long as it is governed by an imperialist state that requires endless war to serve the finance capitalist, the military industrial complex, and all of the other corporate interests which profit from it, as well as the fact that the only way that the United States really has now to assert its dominance is war. The United States has nothing economically to offer the world, and we run into this reality over and over and over again. This is why the United States seems trapped. It seems like it doesn't have the capacity to manage this conflict in the way that it wants to. It wants to push war, but it also knows its own fragility. It may not do what is correct to ensure that awareness of fragility leads to stable policy, but nonetheless, we can see the calculations being made here. So we have to have cool heads. We have to say that Russia is not our enemy. And we have to understand Russia's perspective. This isn't about, and we have to really push back on this whole, oh, you're a Putin puppet. I see it all over my Twitter timeline, my replies. You're Putin this, you're Russia that. We have to ignore that. And why do we have to ignore that? Because that has been an ideological campaign for the last 6+ years to delegitimize any challenge to imperialism. That's what Russiagate was about. Russiagate was about, of course, domestic political concerns, but really a big part of it was to turn the narrative around and make it so a flailing imperialist system was under some kind of Russia threat, so it could then justify all the things that have happened, from the domestic censorship to the increasing aggression abroad, including Ukraine. And we have to acknowledge Obama's central role here, and we should not be surprised that Joe Biden has picked up this in such a intense way. He's picked up this project in an intense way. So Ukraine is a flashpoint for this imperialist resistance, this imperialist war against a multipolar world. Ukraine is seen as a pawn here. The United States doesn't care about Ukraine. The United States wants to see Ukraine weak. It wants to see Ukraine divided. It wants to see Ukraine under governance of these far-right neo-Nazi forces. It wants to see Ukraine as a puppet. It wants to see Ukraine as an anti-Russia force. And it wants Ukraine eventually to be in NATO, although because of the public relations issue, I think that is probably tabled for a while now. But it doesn't matter if it's in NATO or not in NATO. If it's a de facto NATO country at this point, given how militarized it has become, given the hundreds of millions that have poured in lethal aid, as the Biden administration calls it. I mean, this is how they're talking about it. They're looking for blood, and blood has been already spilt. You have 40 Ukrainian soldiers die in this escalation, and we've had tens of thousands. We have more than 10,000 people dead or displaced from the Ukrainian military and paramilitary war on its eastern region in Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk. That's where we're at. This is the position we need to take. We need to call for peace, but not without justice, not without respect for self-determination. And self-determination cannot be conditional. It's not self-determination if Ukraine is a US puppet, right? That's how the US defines self-determination here. As long as Ukraine is doing what the United States wants, then self-determination for Ukraine is okay. But for Russia, there's never any self-determination there. Russia does not have any aims that are legitimate, doesn't have any grievances that are legitimate. This black and white thinking has led the left and has led the population generally off a political cliff. And we can't even, as I did in my last stream, understand the larger geopolitical context here. It's not just Russia, it's Russia and China. What happens in Ukraine has ripple effects across the world. Taiwan, the conversation about it, we already see these warmongers talking about, well, we need to save Ukraine so that Taiwan's independence is more likely. And China is already aware of this. China is saying, okay, we see this. That's never going to happen because Taiwan has historically, for hundreds upon hundreds of years, been part of China, even after the so-called exile government, the Republic of China, declared itself the real China. It still said it was China. And it's only been recently that we've had this separatist agenda that has emerged. So this is geopolitics, guys. This is class struggle. Class struggle, you got to take a side. Which side are you on? Which class do you stand with? Do you stand with the imperialists or do you stand with the multipolar world? We cannot just come out and condemn what Russia is doing. We don't necessarily have to sign off on it either. We have to say, okay, great. We don't know, right? We don't know what it's like. We have to understand we don't know what it's like. And we have to then pose the question, well, if we want this to stop, how can it really stop? What will really stop this? And the only answer to that is that Russia's demands are taken seriously, its requests, its hopes, its interests are taken seriously, treated equally in the realm of any negotiations, and that we have a real push and a move toward what Russia has wanted. We should support that. The ultimate aims that Russia wants are supportable. They're things that we should support. We should support the demilitarization of the region. We should support the abolition of NATO. And they're not even calling for the abolition of NATO. They're just saying, stop admitting NATO countries. 14 countries have been admitted to NATO since 1999. It has doubled, more than doubled in size. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, right on Russia's border, constantly and consistently holding military exercises, NATO exercises, some of which are directly preparing for an invasion of Russia. The United States doesn't know what that's like to feel the threat of invasion. There's a great book by an author, Paul Abbott, called War and Empire, An American Way of Life. And it goes over this history of the United States and war. And the central argument is, and it's not a full, I wouldn't say it's a full analysis, full anti-imperialist analysis, but it makes a great point. The point is that the United States has never understood what it's like to be invaded. Never. Geographically, geopolitically, the way that it is developed over the course of the American empire's life has kept the United States from any legitimate challenge to its imperialist system. Through the development before it was an imperial. Depends on your definition of imperialism, but in the Leninist sense, before the United States was imperialist, even then it didn't have any understanding of what that's like. And let's not talk about the revolution of 1776 as being an invasion, because that wasn't one. So the United States has always played this role as the aggressor, never having a threat to its own existence, but creating threats over and over and over and over again to justify its own expansion. That is what we should be discussing here. Russia is being manufactured as a threat. Russia is not a threat to the United States. Russia does not want to threaten the United States. How many times? We can't even count the number of times. In the last 10 years alone, that Vladimir Putin has said that he wants cordial relations with the United States, that the ultimate goal is to repair relations. It's been the United States' aggression that has pushed Russia away from the US and towards China. That's the US is doing. That is the contradiction here in the conflict. The United States is pushing Russia and China together. I would see that as a positive outgrowth of this aggression, an inevitable one that is objective and cannot be disputed and should not be disputed. There are some, I saw Matt Taibbi on Katie Halper yesterday saying, ooh, that's a bad thing in the US's sense. But I could tell that he didn't think that was a good thing. For me, that's a good thing. Because if US aggression is inevitable, then we have to objectively analyze what the results and the consequences are that come out of that. And if the consequences are a deeper China-Russia relationship, that is a deeply positive thing because it means that there is possibly a way out of this aggression. That is what we also have to be thinking about. Is there a way out here? Is there forces out there that we can support? There's a lot of negativity, right, on social media, in the media. There's a lot of negativity everywhere about this because of the fear-mongering. Russia, Russia, Russia. So now when Russia actually does make a move to defend itself, regardless of what you think about it, you may think that it's wrong, you may think that it's wrong-headed, not smart. Regardless of that, that's judgment. But if we just look at this objectively, then we need to ask the question, where is this going? And is there a possible positive opportunity out of this? Is there something that we can do to affect this? And there is. It's to speak out, to challenge, to debate, to be involved in any effort to fight back against this imperialist narrative and these policies to help build a real anti-war movement, a real anti-imperialist movement that can stop this, that can stop the US's involvement. That is what we can do. That is the only thing that we should be discussing. Judging Russia's actions here, I mean, we can do it. You're free to do it, but it's inconsequential. Not only is it inconsequential, but it's likely to be unhelpful because you're likely not going to understand the full scope of it. You'll only be able to understand the decision you can make as a person between Russia and the United States' perspective. So you got to have both perspectives. Then you got to make the call yourself. But none of that should get in the way of the need to oppose U.S. interventionism, militarism that's happening right now. It's happening right now. It's been happening. And it's caused so much suffering in Ukraine, in Eurasia, in the world at large. As the United States was spreading all this fear about Russia in Ukraine, today we have Israel, which receives enormous funds from the United States militarily, military aid, billions per year, was bombing Syria, killed soldiers in Syria. Very serious. They do it hundreds of times, 100 times per year at least, which is like once every couple of days, right? So that's happening in Syria. In Somalia, Joe Biden's restarting the drone program and droning Somalia through the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM. The U.S. is the aggressor. It's the aggressor in Ukraine. It's the aggressor against Russia. It's the aggressor everywhere. If you leave that out of your analysis, if you leave that out of your understanding of what's going on right now, then you are part of the problem. That is it. The Marxist analysis here is understanding the balance of forces, understanding Russia's position, seeing the dialectical relationship between the U.S.'s aggression, how this escalation came about, and how that reveals, through an understanding and analysis of that, that reveals that the U.S. is actually the problem that needs to be resolved. The U.S. is the enemy of humanity. U.S. imperialism is the enemy of humanity. Period. Right? So it's good being with all of you today. I know I'm only 40 minutes in, but I'm going to have to go in about a couple minutes. So please like the stream. You're here. Please like the stream, subscribe to the stream, hit the button, hit the bell, all of that. And if you can, support my work at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. I'm like one subscriber from 415. Some of you all are really interested in me getting more dog care. That's part of it. But really, the reason I'm raising funds monthly is to eventually travel. I would love to go to Russia, but really I have China, Vietnam, hopefully Laos, because I want to go on the Sino-Lao Railway. I want to report on these things from a US perspective, a US left and anti-imperialist perspective. There are people abroad who are doing this, but most of them are not really movement people or people who are engaged in class struggle. They're more so involved in the travel laws, and now they're speaking out against imperialism, right? And that's all very important. But I want to do this from a US perspective. There are not a lot of Americans doing this, and that's what I aim to do. So please do support me at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong for whatever amount you're able to give. So that's my perspective on Ukraine.